What if I told you that everything we call politics today has almost nothing to do with what the Greeks understood by the word politikos? What we witness in our democracies, the endless campaigning, the governing of people, the administration of society, would have been deeply puzzling to those who first conceived political life as something entirely different. They discovered something extraordinary: that humans possess a unique capacity to act together, not to rule over others, but to create a space where equals can appear before one another in their distinctness. This was not about managing society or implementing policies. It was about the miracle of plurality, the fact that though we are all human, nobody is ever quite like anyone else. The Greeks stumbled upon what I consider the most precious human faculty: the ability to begin something genuinely new through action in concert. Today, we have confused politics with government, power with violence, and freedom with liberation. But there was a time when politics meant something radically different, when it was understood as the very condition that allows human beings to transcend the biological cycle of life and death through words and deeds that could outlast their mortal existence. Let us excavate this buried treasure and examine what we have lost and what we might still recover. Chapter 1: The revolutionary discovery of the political realm. When the Greeks first used the word polis, they were not describing what we would recognize as a state or government. They had made a startling discovery about human nature itself: that humans are political animals not because they need to be governed, but because they have the capacity to act and speak together as equals. This was revolutionary because it distinguished human life from mere biological existence for the first time in history. The Greeks observed that humans, unlike other animals, are not bound entirely by the necessities of survival. While we certainly need food, shelter, and reproduction like all living beings, we possess something additional: the faculty of speech that reveals who we are, not merely what we are. In the household, humans dealt with the necessities of life, the production of goods, the maintenance of the body, the continuation of the species. But the polis was where they could transcend these necessities and appear before others in their unique individuality. This distinction between household and polis, between the private and public realm, was not arbitrary. It corresponded to a fundamental insight about the human condition. In the private sphere, humans are driven by needs and wants. They are concerned with staying alive and maintaining life. But in the public sphere, they can act in ways that reveal their distinctive qualities, their particular excellence, their irreplaceable singularity. The political realm, therefore, was not a place where some ruled over others. That would be more akin to household management, where the head of the household commanded slaves and family members. Politics was the activity of equals who had freed themselves from the necessities of life long enough to engage with one another through speech and action. These equals were not identical. That would make politics impossible. They were equals in their capacity to act and speak, but different in what they revealed through their actions and words. This equality was not a natural given, but an artificial achievement. The polis had to be constituted. It had to be built through human effort. It required laws and institutions, not to govern people, but to establish the boundaries within which political action could take place. The law was like the walls of the city. It created a space, but it did not determine what happened within that space. What made this discovery so remarkable was its recognition that politics is not about implementing policies or managing society, but about the sheer fact that humans can act together to create something entirely new. Every action carried the potential for the unexpected, for breaking the chain of automatic responses that characterize both natural processes and human behavior when driven purely by necessity. Chapter 2: Power through acting in concert. The Greeks understood something about power that we have almost entirely forgotten. Power is not something you possess, but something that springs up between people when they act together. This insight fundamentally challenges our modern conception of power as domination, control, or the ability to force others to do your will. When citizens gathered in the agora to deliberate about public matters, they were not engaging in what we would call government. No one was governing anyone else. Instead, they were generating power through their collective action. This power was not stored anywhere. It could not be accumulated like wealth or passed down like property. It existed only as long as people remained together and continued to act in concert. This understanding of power explains why the Greeks were so concerned with the fragility of the political realm. Unlike the household, which could survive the absence of its members for considerable periods, the polis existed only in the acting and speaking of its citizens. When they stopped coming together, when they ceased to care about public affairs, the political realm simply vanished. The buildings might remain, the laws might stay on the books, but the actual polis, the space of political action, would disappear. The genius of this conception is that it reveals power to be essentially nonviolent. Violence, the Greeks understood, is what you resort to when power fails, when you can no longer persuade, when you can no longer inspire people to act with you, when you can no longer generate the kind of collective action that creates power. Then you might turn to violence to get your way. But violence destroys power. It never creates it. This is why the Greeks distinguished so sharply between political action and warfare. War might be necessary for the preservation of the polis, but it was not political action. In war, you used force to compel your enemies. In politics, you used speech to persuade your equals. The warrior might win glory through his courage in battle, but the citizen achieved excellence through his ability to speak and act in the public realm. The implications of this understanding are profound. It means that legitimate political authority cannot be based on superior strength, greater knowledge, or divine sanction. It can only emerge from the free consent of equals who choose to act together. Authority, in other words, has to be constantly renewed through the continued participation of citizens in public life. This also explains why the Greeks were so suspicious of professional politicians or permanent rulers. They understood that when political action becomes the specialized activity of a few, it ceases to be political action at all. It becomes a form of rule, a type of domination that destroys the very equality that makes politics possible. The power that emerges from acting in concert is therefore both the most fragile and the most durable of human phenomena. It is fragile because it depends entirely on the continued willingness of people to participate. But it is durable because, unlike violence or coercion, it creates lasting bonds between people and establishes precedents that can inspire future action. Chapter 3: The Space of Appearance and Human Plurality. What made Greek political life so extraordinary was their recognition that politics exists only where people can appear before one another in their distinctness. This space of appearance was not a physical location, but a kind of stage that came into being whenever people gathered to act and speak together. It was here that humans could reveal who they were through their words and deeds. Think about this carefully. The space of appearance was not about what people did for a living, what they owned, or what roles they played in society. It was about who they were as unique individuals. In the household, you were defined by your function. You were the master, the slave, the wife, the child. In the political realm, you could reveal your particular qualities, your distinctive way of being human. This revelation of who someone is, as opposed to what they are, can only happen in the presence of others. You cannot appear to yourself. You need spectators who can see your actions and witnesses who can hear your words. This is why politics is essentially plural. It requires not just one person, but many people, and not just any people, but people who are different from one another. The Greeks understood that this plurality is both the condition and the purpose of politics. If all people were identical, there would be no need for politics. There would be nothing to discuss, no different perspectives to consider, no variety of responses to any given situation. But if people were so different that they could not communicate with one another, politics would be impossible. Political action requires people who are similar enough to understand each other, but different enough to have something meaningful to say to one another. This is why I have always insisted that plurality is not just a fact about human beings. It is the essential human condition for politics. We are all human, and in that sense we are all the same. But nobody is ever quite like anyone else who has lived, lives now, or will ever live. This paradox of equality and distinction is what makes political life both possible and necessary. In the space of appearance, people do not just act, they begin. Every action has the capacity to start something new, to break the chain of predictable responses that characterize natural processes. This is what I call natality. The fact that humans are born not just as biological beings, but as beings capable of making new beginnings through their actions. But here is something crucial that we have forgotten. The space of appearance is extremely fragile. It has no tangible, worldly structure of its own. Unlike the household, which has buildings and property, unlike the market, which has goods and money, the political realm exists only in the acting and speaking of people. When people withdraw from public life, when they become concerned only with their private affairs, the space of appearance simply vanishes. This fragility is why the Greeks were so concerned with memory and storytelling. They knew that political actions, unlike the products of work or the results of labor, leave no lasting trace in the world unless someone remembers them and tells stories about them. The greatest political actors needed poets and historians to ensure that their deeds would be remembered and could inspire future generations. What we have lost is precisely this understanding of politics as the space where human beings can appear in their uniqueness. Instead, we have reduced politics to administration, to the management of social processes, to the implementation of policies. We have forgotten that politics is about who we are, not what we do. Chapter 4: Freedom as the Capacity to Begin. The Greeks made another revolutionary discovery. Freedom is not the absence of obstacles, but the positive capacity to begin something new. This understanding of freedom as beginning, as what I call natality, stands in sharp contrast to our modern notion of freedom as liberation from constraints or the ability to do whatever we want. When a citizen stood up in the agora to speak about public affairs, he was exercising freedom not because no one was stopping him, but because he was initiating something that had never existed before: his particular perspective on the common world, his unique contribution to the ongoing conversation about how to live together. Every speech act was a new beginning, a way of starting something that could change the course of events. This capacity for beginning is what distinguishes human action from both natural processes and human behavior. Natural processes follow predictable patterns. The sun rises and sets. The seasons change. Plants grow and die according to their nature. Human behavior, when driven by necessity or conditioning, is also largely predictable. If you know someone's interests, habits, and circumstances, you can often predict how they will act. But genuine action, political action, has the quality of unexpectedness. It interrupts the flow of predictable events and introduces something genuinely new into the world. This is why the Greeks associated politics with excellence and greatness. Not because political actors were necessarily better people, but because they had the courage to act in ways that could not be predicted from their past or their circumstances. The freedom to begin is also why political action always carries an element of risk. When you act politically, you cannot control the consequences of your action. You start something, but you cannot determine how others will respond, how your action will be interpreted, or what chain of events it will set in motion. This is what makes political action both thrilling and dangerous. The Greeks understood that this freedom could only be exercised among equals. If someone has power over you, if they can force you to act in certain ways, then you are not free to begin. You are merely responding to their commands. Similarly, if you have power over others in the sense of being able to compel them, then you are not engaged in political action, but in rule or domination. This is why authentic political freedom requires the artificial equality of citizenship. Natural inequalities, differences in strength, intelligence, wealth, or social position have to be temporarily set aside to create a space where people can appear as equals with the capacity to act and speak. This equality is not a denial of human differences, but a way of creating conditions under which those differences can be politically relevant. What we have lost is this understanding of freedom as the capacity to begin. We have reduced freedom to privacy, the right to be left alone, or to consumer choice, the ability to select from pre-existing options. But neither privacy nor consumption involves the kind of beginning that characterizes genuine political action. True political freedom involves stepping out of the predictable patterns of private life and joining with others to create something new in the world. It requires the courage to speak and act in public, knowing that you cannot control the consequences, but trusting in the power that emerges when people act together. This freedom is not a natural gift, but an achievement that has to be constantly renewed. It depends on the existence of public spaces where people can appear as equals, on institutions that preserve these spaces, and on the willingness of citizens to participate in the ongoing creation of the common world. Chapter 5: The Tragic Loss of Political Experience. What happened to this extraordinary discovery of the political realm? How did we move from the Greek understanding of politics as the space where humans could appear in their distinctness to our current conception of politics as the management of society? The answer involves a long and tragic history of the gradual eclipse of genuine political experience. The first blow came with the Roman transformation of the Greek polis into the Roman res publica. While the Romans preserved many aspects of political life, they fundamentally altered its meaning. For the Romans, politics became primarily about law and administration, about governing territories and populations. The Roman genius lay in organization and rule, not in the spontaneous action and speech that characterized Greek political life. The Romans turned politics into a profession. Instead of citizens who periodically gathered to deliberate about public affairs, Rome developed a class of professional politicians who made careers out of public life. This professionalization was the beginning of the end for authentic political experience, because it meant that politics became the specialized activity of a few rather than the common activity of all citizens. The Christian era brought another transformation that further undermined political life. Christianity introduced the notion that the highest human activities were not worldly, but otherworldly, not public but private. The Christian emphasis on the soul and its salvation shifted attention away from the common world that humans share and toward the interior life of the individual. Politics, at best, became a necessary evil, a way of maintaining order in the earthly city while awaiting the heavenly one. The modern age completed this transformation through what I call the rise of the social. Modern societies became obsessed with processes, economic growth, social development, historical progress, instead of providing a stage for individual excellence and political action. The public realm became a space for managing these social processes. Politics became administration, and citizens became consumers of government services. Perhaps most destructively, the modern age inverted the relationship between public and private. Instead of the public realm being the space of freedom and the private realm being the sphere of necessity, we now think of privacy as the realm of freedom and public life as a burden or constraint. People retreat into their private lives and leave public affairs to professionals, politicians, bureaucrats, experts. This retreat into privacy has had catastrophic consequences for our understanding of freedom and power. We no longer know how to generate power through acting in concert. Instead, We rely on violence and coercion to achieve our goals. We no longer understand politics as the space where humans can appear in their uniqueness. Instead, we see it as a realm of conflicting interests that need to be managed or manipulated. The result is what I observe around us today: the gradual disappearance of the public realm as a space of political action. We have democracy in the sense of voting and representation, but we have lost the direct experience of political participation. We have freedom in the sense of privacy and consumer choice, but we have lost the freedom that comes from acting together with equals to shape the common world. Most tragically, we have lost the understanding that politics is about who we are as distinct individuals, not just what we want or need. Modern politics has become largely about the distribution of goods and services, the management of economic and social processes, the satisfaction of private interests. We have forgotten that politics was once about the human capacity to transcend these necessities and create something genuinely new in the world. This loss is not just historical. It continues to affect how we understand political life today. When people complain about politics being corrupt or meaningless, they are often expressing, without knowing it, a sense that what we call politics today lacks the grandeur and significance that political action once possessed. Chapter 6: The Confusion of Politics with Rule. One of the most destructive confusions that has plagued political thought since antiquity is the conflation of politics with rule. This confusion has led us to think that politics is fundamentally about some people governing others, about the exercise of authority over subjects, about the implementation of decisions made by those in power. But this understanding would have been incomprehensible to those who first discovered political life. The confusion begins with a misunderstanding of what the Greeks meant by authority. In the political realm, authority did not mean the right to command others. It meant the ability to inspire action, to call forth the best in people, to create the conditions under which collective action could flourish. Authority in this sense was not something you possessed, but something that emerged from your ability to speak and act in ways that others found compelling. When we think of politics as rule, we immediately introduce a distinction between rulers and ruled that destroys the equality essential to political life. The moment some people have the right to command and others have the obligation to obey, we are no longer in the realm of politics, but in the realm of domination. This may be necessary for certain purposes: running an army, managing a household, operating a business, but it is not political action. The consequences of this confusion are visible everywhere in our contemporary political life. We expect our political leaders to solve our problems for us, to make decisions that will improve our lives, to manage society in the way that a household head manages domestic affairs. But this expectation transforms citizens into subjects and politicians into rulers. It eliminates the space for genuine political action. Consider how we think about political authority today. We grant authority to those who win elections, and we expect them to use that authority to govern us. But this conception of authority as the right to rule is precisely what destroys political life. When authority becomes a matter of command and obedience, there is no longer any space for the kind of spontaneous action and speech that characterizes authentic politics. The Greeks understood that legitimate authority in political life could only emerge from persuasion among equals. When someone spoke in the agora, their authority depended entirely on their ability to convince their fellow citizens. They could not command agreement. They had to inspire it. This meant that authority was constantly being created and renewed through the ongoing process of political deliberation. This confusion of politics with rule also explains why we have lost the ability to distinguish between power and violence. When we think of politics as the activity of governing people, we naturally assume that political power must involve the capacity to force compliance. But the Greeks understood that the moment you resort to force, you have left the realm of politics and entered the realm of violence. true political power emerges only from the free association of equals who choose to act together. It cannot be stored, accumulated, or possessed by individuals. It exists only in the acting and speaking of people who have come together for political purposes. This power is more durable than violence because it creates lasting bonds between people. But it is also more fragile because it depends entirely on the continued participation of those who generate it. The tragedy of modern politics is that we have almost entirely lost this understanding of power as something that emerges between people rather than something that some people have over others. We think of political power as the ability to get things done, to implement policies, to force compliance with laws. But this instrumental conception of power misses entirely what made political life so precious to those who first discovered it. When politics becomes rule, it also becomes a matter of technique and expertise. We look for leaders who know how to govern effectively, who have the skills and knowledge necessary to manage complex social and economic processes. But this technocratic approach to politics eliminates precisely what made political action valuable: its capacity to reveal the unique qualities of individuals and to create something genuinely new through collective action. Chapter 7: Recovering the Political, Natality and New Beginnings. Despite the tragic loss of authentic political experience, the human capacity for political action has not disappeared. It remains latent in every human being, waiting to be actualized under the right conditions. This is what I mean by natality: the fact that humans are born not just as biological beings, but as beings capable of making new beginnings through their actions and words. The Greeks discovered something permanent about the human condition: that humans possess the capacity to transcend the automatic cycles of natural life and create something unprecedented in the world. This capacity does not depend on particular political institutions or cultural traditions. It is rooted in the basic fact that every human being is unique and therefore capable of contributing something that has never existed before to the common world. Even in our thoroughly modern and social world, we can occasionally glimpse what authentic political action looks like. It emerges spontaneously when people come together to address common concerns that cannot be solved through private action or government administration. It appears in moments of crisis when ordinary citizens suddenly discover their capacity to act together in ways that surprise even themselves. Think of those extraordinary moments when people spontaneously organize to address emergencies or injustices. In these moments, we can see the emergence of genuine political power that springs up between people when they act in concert, power that no one possesses but everyone participates in creating. These moments reveal that the capacity for political action has not been destroyed by modernity. It has only been obscured and suppressed. But recovering authentic political experience requires more than waiting for spontaneous moments of collective action. It requires the deliberate creation of spaces where people can appear before one another as equals with the capacity to speak and act. It requires institutions that preserve these spaces without determining what happens within them. It requires a culture that values the public realm as something distinct from both the private sphere of personal life and the social sphere of economic and administrative processes. Most importantly, it requires that we stop thinking of politics as a burden to be borne or a service to be consumed and start thinking of it as an opportunity to participate in the ongoing creation of the common world. Politics is not something that happens to us. It is something we do together when we choose to step out of our private concerns and join with others in public action. This recovery of political experience cannot be accomplished through reform of existing political institutions. Though such reform may be necessary, it requires a more fundamental transformation in how we understand what politics is and why it matters. We need to recover the insight that politics is not primarily about solving problems or managing society, but about providing a space where human beings can appear in their distinctness and contribute to the ongoing creation of the world we share. The hope for such recovery lies in the fact that the desire for political experience, though often suppressed, continues to manifest itself in various forms. People still hunger for the experience of acting together with others, of participating in something larger than their private concerns, of making a meaningful contribution to the common world. This hunger is evident in everything from neighborhood organizing to social movements to online communities where people come together around shared concerns. But these manifestations of the desire for political experience often remain trapped within the categories of social action or interest group politics. They focus on achieving particular goals rather than on the intrinsic value of acting together. They operate within the framework of rule and administration rather than creating genuinely political spaces. The task before us is to nurture and develop these impulses toward political action while helping them transcend the limitations imposed by our current understanding of politics. This means creating opportunities for people to experience the joy and excellence that come from acting in concert with equals. It means preserving and expanding public spaces where such action can take place. It means cultivating the virtues, courage, judgment, wisdom that political action requires. Most fundamentally, it means remembering that politics is about who we are as human beings, not just what we want or need. The Greeks' greatest gift to us was their discovery that humans are political animals not because they need to be governed, but because they have the capacity to govern themselves through acting and speaking together as equals in a common world. Conclusion: the Greeks gave us more than democracy. They gave us the discovery of what it means to be human in a political sense. They showed us that we are not merely biological beings driven by necessity, nor social beings defined by our roles and functions, but political beings capable of transcending both nature and society through action in concert with our equals. We have lost much of this precious inheritance. We have confused politics with administration, power with violence, freedom with privacy, and authority with domination. We have forgotten that the public realm was once a space where humans could appear in their uniqueness and contribute something irreplaceable to the common world. But the capacity for political action remains alive in every human being. Every time someone steps forward to speak truth in public, every time people come together to address common concerns that transcend their private interests, every time citizens choose to engage with public affairs rather than retreat into purely personal concerns, in these moments, we glimpse what the Greeks discovered: that politics is humanity's answer to the fact that we are both equal and distinct, both similar enough to communicate and different enough to have something meaningful to say to one another. The task before us is not to return to ancient Greek democracy. That world is gone forever. Our task is to discover new ways of creating spaces where genuine political action can flourish in our modern conditions. This requires courage, because political action always involves risk. It requires judgment, because we must learn to distinguish between what is politically relevant and what belongs to other spheres of human activity. Most of all, it requires remembering that we are beings capable of beginning something new, of breaking the chains of automatic response and creating unprecedented possibilities for human life together. The alternative is the gradual death of the political realm, and with it, the loss of one of humanity's most precious capacities: